Hello, folks. My name is Daniel Fosco. I'm the senior product designer on the release group in GitLab, and I'm here with Chris Balani. Chris.
Hi, everyone. I'm the senior product manager for release.
So this meeting is a brainstorm for how we can improve adoption of environments through in-app notifications in the product. So we already have an epic for this with a few suggestions that we'll go over. But yeah, we'll try to come up with other ones in the process as well. Before we move down the list, the first thing that I actually want to propose, Chris, is for us to rephrase this a little bit, especially the in-app notifications, because I think in-app notifications are one thing we can do to increase adoption, to foster adoption, but it's not the only thing. And there's a bunch of suggestions that they're not exactly notifications. So I will tentatively rephrase it to foster environment and deployment adoption through in-app UI.
Yep, definitely agree with that suggestion,
Right.
Daniel. Yep, thanks for making that suggestion. Definitely, I think when we wrote this originally, we were thinking about how we haven't been leveraging that tactic specifically, but really the goal here is to increase adoption through the application and getting users that are using one part of the application to continue to adopt environments and other release functionality. So perfect.
And I think it's important to add deployment, even though our customers can deploy using GitLab CI without using environments, they go together very strongly. So I think there's opportunities for us to foster environments themselves and then deployments themselves, but they're always talking to each other. So the first thing that we had, actually, the first issue that we worked on in this area for this epic was this one, in product guidance for deployments in the web IDE. That's not the one that's open here. And that was done. That was essentially, it's a simple execution. It's basically this, and this is an in-app notification. I think that's where the original name of the epic came from. So if you have a YAML file that doesn't have deployments detected, we suggest that. We have that in the product already. There is a secondary step to do the same thing in the single file editor. The current implementations on the web IDE. So let's go over some of the suggestions that we have here. I think this first one you were mentioning right before we started recording, like some small low-hanging fruit we can adopt in this epic, and I think these first ones are really low-hanging fruit. Just listing the environments that we have. We already have the releases here. So for a given project, we have this many environments, and if you click it, you go to the environments page. I guess this one would show only if you have environments. If you don't, we would have an empty state perhaps down here. There's a good example here. So here where you can see you can go straight to the README, to the changelog, to the CI/CD configuration. And then if you don't have integrations configured, it shows this dashed button as an empty state. So we could have configure environments as well. So if you have environments, they show up here. If you don't, then you have an option to configure them down here. I think these two are very close to each other in terms of the design and the implementation, and maybe they could be the first ones we do. But moving down, we have this really good suggestion from Jamie as well that goes along with the issue we had to better connect releases and deployments and environments. And I think this is a great example where they can help each other, right? Maybe a specific customer uses releases a lot to save specific versions of their application and specific assets, but then they deploy using something else. So we can either have this kind of notification if you're not using environments, right? But if you are using environments, we can go even further. Where is the link? Yeah, I added to the epic here. Connection between releases and environments. So if you don't, maybe we have a good empty state opportunity here, linking to the docs. But if you do, then we can show if a release is deployed, to which environment it's deployed, how long it's been there, maybe status of the pipeline. There's a lot of opportunities here. The empty state would help initial adoption, but at the same time, if once you adopt, you have really good visibility here, that's one more reason that you would adopt it in the first place. So I think the two talk to each other really well. And feel free to interrupt me at any time, Chris, if another idea comes up, or if you have any thoughts on these.
Sure, that's good. To hear.
And yeah, here's a more specific suggestion also from Jamie, right? Like create or view deployment from the release itself. I'll be honest, I think the way our releases and our environments product work is a bit counterintuitive in the sense that they have a lot of overlap with each other because they were created at different stages of GitLab existence with different focuses. So now we have the opportunity to bring them closer together. And even though some users will only use releases, some users will only use environments, and they can be used for different things, I think they're more powerful if we bring them closer together. So Jamie's suggestion to create or view a deployment would take the user to the GitLab CI on the pipeline editor, on the YAML file, and already have a snippet with a suggestion on how to set that up. So that would be really good. Next up, we have this suggestion from Chinya on investing and adding more deployment templates to the CI/CD templates. We currently don't have a lot of those, and I'm unsure if this view here, this screenshot, is a view for how it could look like in the future. But if we go to new project, we have these templates here, right? Some of them already have deployment setup embedded, right? So I'm more familiar with the static side. So, if you have Hugo or Jekyll, I know some of these facilitate deploying to a certain target already. We have down here Netlify as well that helps you deploy into Netlify. But we don't have anything specifically tailored to deployment, right? Maybe you don't care too much about which framework you're using to your project. You just want to start a project that deploys to a target. So we can definitely help users more closely with this. And this would also be a huge collaboration with the pipeline authoring group that is already working on these interfaces.
Right. We could even have, like a template for the sort of typical environment setups, like a dev, staging, and production, and maybe have that pre-canned template out of the box. So all one click, the users and their teams have all these environments set up, and then that combined with all of the other sort of like kind of nudges we were talking about earlier, I think would lead to the more environment adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. And the focus here is in-app changes, right? So changes to the UI, but obviously there's things to documentation and other assets, other avenues we can use to foster this adoption. And this idea of having better deployment templates in CI/CD reminded me of your initiative to have like better examples for how our product is set up, right? So if we either in the documentation or in the GitLab blog can come up with content that shows users, hey, this is how you deploy to GKE, this is how you deploy to ECS, this is how you configure your environment setup for all of these use cases, like you were mentioning. It will help a lot, and I think it should be in this epic. Maybe not as an initial focus, but then we can break it down later, perhaps, as something that will contribute towards the same goal. I made a suggestion back then here of an empty state in the environments page. I don't think it's not necessarily as strong as adding an entry point elsewhere, because the user has to go to the environments page to see the empty state. But we can definitely have clearer use cases being shown the empty states that direct to specific points in the documentation. So how to protect your production, how to visualize your deploys, with maybe some illustrations that shows the user, oh, this is what it would look like, and this is the value that I would get out of this. So it's definitely a good option as well.
Yeah, Daniel, actually on that do we being relatively new here, do we do any sort of like, I forget what do we call those in the apps? Kind of like the
Empty state?
no, the sort of like a tutorial of a feature, or like, the next, you kind of like click around and it sort of guides you.
Not
and highlights.
really. So let me go to a page that doesn't have any environments. Let's see.
You know what I'm talking about though, right? Like
Yeah,
when
I do.
some other
So,
apps do.
this is what we have in terms of like the plain onboarding, right?
Yeah.
Like you either go to the documentation or you go here and it takes you to the documentation. So it is something, but it can definitely be improved. I think the documentation for environments is pretty good in explaining the concepts and the general gist of it and how to get started. But we can do a better job at helping the user visualize what it looks like when they're successfully using it, right? So that goes over what you mentioned, right? Like some kinds of step-by-step onboarding. And there are initiatives for this across GitLab that we can connect with other groups that are doing it. But yeah, we also have a low-hanging fruit to improve this one for sure.
Cool.
Then the last suggestion here that you brought from Ali was detecting deploy jobs in the YAML file and nudge users to use an environment if we detect deploys that aren't using environments, which I think makes a lot of sense. And in terms of UI, it's pretty similar to the one that we already implemented, this one.
Yep.
But I guess the trigger would be different, right? And then the message would likely be different.
Yeah, and just to jump from there, yeah, I think I agree. As when you mentioned that one earlier, this chat, I realized the connection to. I think it's very similar messaging, something like, it seems like you're deploying, deploy safer or in a better way, some sort of language or messaging to encourage using environments.
Yeah.
Here right now, it looks like it's still just, where does the learn more? I guess it goes to the documentation, I imagine, or
I assume.
I wonder where that, I would assume that goes there too.
Yeah, it takes to the environment documentation.
Because I think, like, I wonder if, and this is definitely more effort, but having a way to click and then have the UI or the YAML file add an actual, like, for us to create an actual environment from there. Right? I wonder. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, let's remind me to add an action point at the end to reach out to Nadia from Pipeline Authoring, because I know if they don't already have this functionality to like paste the snippets, they are working on it.
Okay. Cool.
To some extent. I don't know if it pastes the snippet or just adds it to the clipboard and lets you know. But it's something that we can work towards, and I think makes a lot of sense.
Or even, I guess, let me see, or even, because we have already a workflow through the UI to create a new environment, right? Maybe that could be another, maybe it could even be an easier first iteration of that. But,
it would, yes. So let me see, where was my environment? Yeah. So if I go here, new environment, I can very easily.
Something like that, right? Yeah.
No, it's easy to create, but at the same time, if I'm on the web IDE editing my YAML file, and then I see an option to add an environment, I would expect it to be added from the YAML file.
But I agree. Yeah, I think that's better user experience anyway. We don't want to.
That raises the question: do the environments that I create from the UI, are they reflected on the YAML?
I don't believe so.
I don't think so. That's interesting, right? Because to a certain extent, it would be kind of like how do you say, out of sync, right?
Yeah. Yes.
I expected the YAML to be a source of truth for environments, but I guess that's not necessarily the case. Oh yeah, because the YAML file is a recipe that once it runs, if you have an environment listed there, it will be created. But even if you delete the environment later on, it will still be listed in the YAML file And then if you
Right.
run again, it'll create it again. Okay. So
Yeah, like it exists somewhere. I don't know, maybe an analogy is like it's in the command line, there's like some variable that
Yeah.
exists, but if it's not referring to
Yeah.
it.
If it's listed here, it doesn't mean it exists. It only means it will be created according to these instructions. once it's done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, so that was the last. Let me see if I added, I just kind of listed out in text format, them all here. Do you have any other suggestion that came up?
This is a pretty good list already. I'm just reading through this again. Yeah, I think maybe any of the other suggestions are some of the details in, details that fall under one of these items. Like I just did a couple of weeks ago, I made my own test project, and I checked out code. I made an update. I ran a pipeline. I created there was sort of a kind of a logic jump for me from the CI piece to doing anything related to release or deployment. And so I think that area is probably the best place to focus. So I think like educating, for example, I didn't know I had to create it. I didn't know I had to create an environment. I didn't know how to. I kind of had to stumble my way through. And then even after I created an environment, I didn't really know what to do with it, right? So I think that also piece, right? Like you just create an environment, but now you have to put it into the CI.
Yeah. Can you share your screen and show me your project, like to
yeah,
go over some of these visually?
Let me see, 1 second. Anything else from your side while I pull this up?
No, not from my side. I did think of one more suggestion that maps to the work that we were doing with deployment approvals, to better show the approvals, right, in the pipelines list. But I think that's far too much into you already having environment set up. So even though like it's a feature improvement and a feature addition, so in theory it will also help drive adoption. But it's too down the line, so I don't think it necessarily impacts for this epic.
A second, I logged me out, so I'm logging back in. Yeah, and then just thinking aloud here also about the ideas we talked about, I think a lot of it was focused on awareness of an environment. So I think that's probably the first area we should explore.
Yeah.
Just people knowing and discovering environments, learning about what they are, and then it's thinking about how do we make it easier for them to use. So
yeah,
right.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to have this distinction, and making sure that also for both we have really good tracking. For the the badges on the project home for environments, we track how many people are seeing that. For clickable elements, we track how many people are clicking that, and try, at least in the aggregate, map the interactions with the changes we made to adoption of environments.
Right.
I'll add a note in the doc about this.
Cool. Later on, just to drop this thought, just later on, and then it's not the focus now, but later on, we'll want to think about, like, when we measure it, we'll want to see how people start to adopt it, but also how much we want to, like, retention, right? How many people continue to use environments because it's a useful concept and feature.
Do we have any tracking of that sense, like the churn of the feature itself?
I believe we have the raw material, like the data to be able to do that. I don't know if we've looked at that. I have personally not looked at that since I've been here. I've looked at it. I've looked at a sort of a higher level, just because I look at, we look at monthly active users in SMAO, and it continues to increase. So that's good. But yeah, I think we want to zoom in, like, as we're developing new features, we want to zoom in a little bit more on that to make sure people are retaining.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Thanks for adding that now. Cool. Okay, let me share my screen. So yeah, let me know when you can see it. Can you see it, Daniel? Nope, I think you're on mute now.
Yeah, I can see it.
Cool. Yeah, so I started using one of the templates actually that we were just talking about. I think it was one of the Rails template. I created a test project that was pretty smooth and really easy to do, which is great. I was able to, I'm kind of trying to remember what I did back a few weeks ago, but in general, really easy to make updates, able to see pipelines and see the status. I did run into an error. I can't remember exactly why, but I remember trying to use the UI and then, oh, okay, that's what it was. Something about, I didn't have a credit card loaded into my account. And so when the pipeline tried to run, I think automatically just from the sort of step-by-step guide, it failed. So kind of had to debug a little bit and figure that out. But anyway, I was able to run it. And so because it was the project template already had a CI YAML file, but what I was pointing out to Daniel just earlier is that even after having set this up, it's a little unclear, just from viewing what's in the product itself today, it's not exactly clear what to do next in terms of setting up a release or setting up an environment. And I think this is the area where there's a lot of opportunity for us to educate, to have in-product guidance, to maybe be more kind of pointed and maybe opinionated about what steps they should, a user or a team should do next to deploy. So, one approach, just to think of like maybe different approaches. One approach is to be really maybe aggressive is the wrong word, but really kind of just highlight that the first thing they should do is to try to deploy this project to production just to test it out, right? So like, it's kind of an extreme thing we could do, but you could imagine ways and in multiple areas throughout the UI here that help and guide the user to be able to do that really quickly. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. It is tricky to be opinionated at GitLab in the sense that we have so many different customers with so many different use cases. So it's hard to say like what should we suggest specifically, but we should definitely suggest something, right? Like set up an environment in a certain way, and then try to find the sweet spot where we're suggesting something that at the very least for a first setup makes sense for most of our users. And if like we have any way to slice that into, if you have a certain configuration, a certain size of organization, I don't know if we can do that, but if we can suggest a certain setup or just have a list of, you can do one of these three things, right? And just allow the user to discover and read the materials and read the documentation, but always pointing to some direction, never having dead ends in the setup.
Definitely. And that's a great way of putting it, Daniel. Like I think it was a dead end. I hit, I have a software background, I kind of understand the basics and sort of the next steps after running a pipeline and testing, but it wasn't obvious to me, and I think that's what we want to do. It wasn't obvious for me what to do next, even in terms of using the other release functionality. So again, like you said, suggesting to create a new environment if we know that they don't have one, because that's probably a best practice that we want to we want to convey.
Yeah.
And of course, we also want them to use our features and things like that. So that's sort of what I was getting at earlier. And I think, you know, this conversation will do a lot to, the ideas we talked about today will do a lot here to help increase that.
Yeah, makes sense. So I added one more item in the doc that reads, once you set up a pipeline, it's unclear what to do next. Set up a release, set up environments, how to actually deploy, right?
Right.
Because that's a pain point I also went through. Right after I joined, I was tasked with doing a test setup to understand the product, deploying to AWS, and it was tough. And at various points in the process, my pipeline was green, like I had finished all the steps that I had so far, but I was still unsure, like to which extent is my setup correct, and to which extent it is actually doing what it's supposed to do. Because just because the pipeline isn't broken doesn't mean my entire setup is done. So I think it's not necessarily the scope of environments, but it's also having the understanding that the user completing the steps might not be enough for them to reach their goal, and how we can actually assist them in reaching their final goal, which is having the code running in an environment, in a real environment somewhere that they can access through the GitLab interface.
Yeah. Awesome. Couldn't have said it better. Well said.
Great.
Actually, this is sort of a wild idea, but just as you were saying that, I think you're right in terms of maybe like another area of opportunity is in some way helping our customers stand up those environments, either for the first time or you know, or changing those over time. And I wonder if there's an opportunity for GitLab in some way, whether it's technology or even you know, someone doing this, and maybe we do this already, but like reviewing those sort of environment setups and pipelines. Like, you know, this is sort of a silly idea, but something like, you know, let's say someone like a release engineer, a deployment kind of platform person, sets up their YAML file, their targets, and then you could almost imagine like something like in GitLab, like review my pipeline, or review my, you know, kind of my setup, right, to make sure they're on the right track. Because I think, because like you said, like that's very difficult. That was difficult for us, and we work here, and we should have access to all of that expertise. But I can imagine someone new to GitLab, maybe new to DevOps, even, and you know, maybe something to like think about just for future, but that'd be pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, I think informally that's what we're going to start doing with more frequent customer interviews, and not only interviewing customers, but making sure like they can share their setup, right? Like, oh yeah, this is how my setup is currently working, and this is what's not working. This is what's hard for me, right?
Yeah.
And we bring those insights back into this conversation. But
Right.
yeah, I absolutely agree that it would be really nice to have a magic button where a person fixes your pipeline.
Review my pipeline, or review my like my stages or something like that, and then maybe even later like be able to share it with the community or something like that. I think keep thinking about
that points back to the work that Pipeline Authoring is doing with the deployment templates, the CI/CD templates, where at some point the idea is to have a broader pool of templates that the community can contribute to. So your idea might seem far-fetched, but I don't think it's that much.
Good to hear.
All right.
Cool.
So I think we're good to start wrapping this up into action points. What do you say?
Sure. Yeah, sounds great.
Right. So I will share my screen back in the doc. Action points. I would say the first thing is just create issues for the main points.
Yep.
Questions or points, and add them to the epic. That'll be the first thing, and then from there we just schedule for 14.8 and later.
Yeah, I think, do you mind if I add a few
Yeah, go for it.
sub
Of course.
steps? Because I think it would probably be great to get and Jinya, Jaime, others have been already, I think, contributing, which is fantastic. But I think once we create the issues, we could get Edge feedback on the ideas and sort of idea of scope, just because it's great for you and me to discuss some of these ideas, but then definitely we want to get the team's input.
I skipped that step for sure.
No, all good. And then, yeah, for me, I think we want to estimate like impact and prioritize. So, and I can help with that as well. Cool.
Yeah, I think one like horizontal effort within this epic is the tracking, making sure we have a consistent tracking strategy, right? That we can reapply for each one of these small changes. We could reach out to the growth team to see like what they are currently doing in terms of experimentation. I don't think these necessarily have to be experiments. Could be, could not be. It depends on how high traffic also like these specific features are, right? Depending on where they are located. But it would be nice to have them as experiments. If not, just having a structure of wrapping it in a feature flag and then wrapping it into what's it called, Snowplow event tracking, right? So for each badge, for each button, you know how many people are seeing it, how many people are clicking it, and then we can aggregate these interactions and compare them against adoption.
Definitely. Yep. That's perfect. Yeah, I don't know much yet, but this is a good opportunity to collaborate with the, like you said, with the growth team, with Gila and team. My understanding is that, especially if we decide to use in-app, like specifically in-app notifications for some of these, I think there's it seems like there's already like a foundation for doing experimentation with that and hopefully measuring. Hopefully that includes measuring as well. So that's something, yeah, that's something I can follow up on with the team as well, and maybe we could collaborate on the issues once we decide on which ones we want to.
Yeah, I think to be honest, even for the ones that are not like notifications like this one, we should collaborate with the create team that handles projects, repositories,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Not to just shove a new button in the repository UI, because sometimes they're restructuring it, they are redesigning it. So we have to make sure that there's a right approach and context for adding these.
Sounds good. Awesome.
All right. Cool. So I'll defer to you to create the issues if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Feel free to ping me in each one of them, and I'll help filling up details and the UX proposal for each one of them, that kind of thing.
Perfect.
All right.
That's good.
Cool. So if you don't have any other points, I think we can wrap up the recording.
I think we're good.
All right.
Thanks for watching.
For watching, folks. See you soon.